Hey, good morning. It's July 23rd, and we're in Second Chronicles, chapter 10 today. And I think we've covered this before a little bit when we were in First Kings earlier on, the division of the kingdom. So there are three dates that I often have my classes memorize, and unfortunately, they're all tragic dates. The first of those is 931 BC, and that's this one that we're coming to here today. That's when the kingdom divides between north and south on the death of Solomon. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. The second one of those is 722 BC, and that's when Assyria completely destroys the northern kingdom of Israel. And then finally, 586, which is the year when the temple is destroyed and the southern kingdom is also done away with for some time, taken into exile. And so those are really bad dates to remember, but they're helpful for us in understanding the flow of the Old Testament a little bit. And so this date in 931 is what we've come to in Second Chronicles, and it's recounted a little bit here. And just a short thing that I wanted to mention here. So you have Jeroboam, who's going to be the first king of that northern kingdom. Who he's not descended from David or Solomon. He's one of Solomon's advisors or administrators, really, within his kingdom, but comes to a place of power, and God actually ends up promising him the same things that he had promised to David and Solomon, the the tribes that would be under his control if he would obey him. But there's Jeroboam who goes up to the north, and there's Rehoboam who would be down in the south. He is a descendant of Solomon and the rightful heir to the throne. But he makes a bunch of foolish decisions that end up driving away those from the 10 tribes of the north. At least they use that as an excuse. And this is what they say to him in response to his just his laying out of the program that he's going to have for them if he's to be their king. In verse 16 of chapter 10, it says, "When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, 'What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel, look after your own house, David.'" So they're saying we're splitting off from the Davidic dynasty as our king. We're not going to be a part of the 12 tribes anymore. We're going to have our own 10 tribes to the north, and you guys can do what you want to down there in the south. But there's an interesting phrase, and this is something that's just come up recently in Biblical Archaeology Review, a magazine that I read quite frequently. And it's just this incidental phrase. It says, "To your tents, Israel." And so there's been a lot of debate among those who are archaeologists in Israel, even Israeli archaeologists, about the even existence of David and his kingdom, and even going back further than that, where did the Israelites come from, all that kind of thing. And one of the things that they often mention is that there's not a lot of evidence in David's day of large cities, or even in Solomon's days of large cities throughout the land, that those come along later on, or that there were other people occupying those cities at those times. But I think it's interesting even to say here that they mentioned to your tents, Israel. Now, that could certainly be just an illustration. They maybe don't mean literally their tents, but it could be that they actually do mean literally their tents, that most of the people actually lived out in the fields where their crops were or where their livestock was, and not in large cities, that the large cities were primarily for protection against invasion from the Assyrians or Babylonians or Egyptians or some other, or even the other nations around them. So I think it's possible, and maybe even likely, that this clue here tells us that they were actually primarily living in tents. And so there wouldn't have been a lot of leftover buildings, obviously, that would come from a large walled city at that time. So I think it's an interesting little piece there that might be a good part for us to understand.